The laughter stopped Rowan cold. He stood in the hallway of the 42nd floor penthouse, one hand raised to push open the bedroom door, the other hanging at his side like dead weight. The laughter came again, low, easy, the kind that only happens when someone believes they are completely alone. Or completely untouchable. Rowan did not move. His military training told him to assess before acting. Slow the breath. Read the room before you enter it. His body, however, was already 3 steps ahead of his training. The tightness in his chest. The way his jaw locked. The quiet, devastating way his stomach dropped. He pushed the door open anyway. Caspian Rourke, his husband of 14 months, did not scramble. Did not flinch. He looked up from where he sat at the edge of the California King, a man pressed against him like a second skin, and he simply watched Rowan. The way you watch a fly land on a window. Mildly. Without urgency. Without shame. Hi viewers, have you ever stood in a room and felt completely invisible to the one person who was supposed to see you? Drop a yes or no in the comments right now, because what Rowan is about to go through will hit different if you have. The man beside Caspian smirked. He didn't even try to cover himself. He just leaned back against the headboard like he had done it 100 times. Maybe he had. Rowan's hands were steady. That much he could control. 5 years of active duty had given him that, the ability to keep his hands still even when the rest of him was falling apart. His face stayed flat. His voice, when it came, was quiet. Caspian. That was all he said. Just the name. One word carrying everything. Caspian exhaled through his nose. He reached over to the nightstand, unhurried, picked up his glass of bourbon, and took a slow sip. Then he looked at Rowan the way you look at someone who has interrupted a meeting they weren't invited to. Don't act like you didn't know what this marriage was. The words landed like a boot to the sternum. Clean. Precise. Calculated. Rowan had survived 2 deployments. He had held a tourniquet on a man's leg in a ditch outside Kabul and talked him through consciousness until the helicopter arrived. He had been through things that most people could not imagine, things that lived in the back of his skull on the quiet nights. None of that had prepared him for this specific kind of cruelty. The casual kind. The kind that didn't even bother to dress itself up. He swallowed. Once. He turned and walked out. The hallway felt longer than it had 60 seconds ago. The floor-to-ceiling glass walls on either side showed the skyline of the city below, all glittering lights and steel and wealth. And Rowan moved through it like a man walking through water. Slow. Pressured. Suffocating. He stopped at the end of the hall and pressed his back to the wall. His hands, still steady, always steady, pressed flat against the cool surface behind him. His eyes closed. He let himself have exactly 4 seconds of falling apart. 4 seconds. Then he shut it down. The discharge had taken his career. The injury had taken 6 months of his body. The debt had taken everything else. And Caspian had arrived at exactly the right moment, offering safety, offering stability, offering a way out of the suffocating spiral Rowan had been drowning in. You're safe because of me. That's what Caspian had said, 3 months into their arrangement. You're safe because of me. Rowan had believed it. He had chosen to believe it. He pushed off the wall and moved toward the main living area. The penthouse opened up ahead of him. Wide and immaculate, glass and marble and the kind of furniture that cost more than most people's cars. Caspian's world. Every inch of it curated and controlled. Rowan's eyes moved across the room on instinct. Cataloging. The way they always did in unfamiliar territory. And that was when he saw it. On Caspin's desk, beside the open laptop and the untouched stack of contracts, sat a security badge on a lanyard. Clean white card. Black lettering. Rowan had seen enough clearance credentials in his life to know what a high-level security tag looked like. This one read Virelli Detail. Rowan frowned. His hand moved toward it without thinking. Caspin's voice came from behind him. Rowan hadn't even heard him approach. That bothered him more than anything. I hired a new bodyguard. He starts tonight. Rowan did not turn around. He stared at the badge. The name on it. Virelli. Something cold moved through him that had nothing to do with the climate control of the penthouse. Tonight. The word settled on him like a stone. He arrived at 9:45. No knock. No announcement. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse foyer, and the man walked out of it like he had already mapped every exit in his head before the doors finished parting. Rowan was standing at the kitchen island when it happened. He had a glass of water in his hand and nowhere in particular to be, which was its own specific kind of humiliation. He looked up. And the man stopped. Not because he was startled. There was nothing startled about him. He stopped the way a predator stops when it clocks something it wasn't expecting, a half-second recalibration, so fast that anyone not trained to notice would have missed it. Rowan noticed. He was tall. Not unusually so, but the way he held himself made him seem larger than the space he occupied. Dark suit. No tie. The collar of his shirt opened by one button, not casual, calculated. His eyes were sharp and still and the color of deep water. They moved across Rowan in exactly 2 seconds. That was it. 2 seconds. The full assessment. Then he looked away, as if he had already filed Rowan under a category and moved on. Rowan felt the back of his neck go tight. Caspin appeared from the hallway with the ease of a man who owned every room he walked into, because he did. He gestured toward the new arrival with the same energy he used when referencing a new piece of furniture. Rowan. This is Dante Virelli. He'll be handling security going forward. Handling security. Like it was a plumbing contract. Dante inclined his head once. Not a bow. Not a nod exactly. More like an acknowledgement. The minimum acceptable movement. Mr. Rourke, he said. And his voice was low and even, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to carry weight. I've reviewed the building layout. I'll need access to the service elevator codes by morning. Caspin waved a hand. Already bored. Already moving on. Talk to Marcus, he handles all that. He disappeared back down the hallway. Just like that. The door to his study clicked shut behind him. And Rowan was alone in the kitchen with a man he did not know, whose eyes had already moved back to him. Rowan set down his water glass. Straightened slightly, without thinking. An old reflex. The posture you defaulted to when you needed to establish that you were not to be underestimated. You report to me, Rowan said. When Mr. Rourke isn't available, anything related to household security goes through me first. Dante looked at him for a moment. Just a moment. I answered to the contract. Not to his ego. Rowan blinked. He had expected deference. Or at least the performance of it. The men Caspin hired always performed it, the careful, practiced submission of people who understood where their paycheck came from. This man performed nothing. Dante moved toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that ran the length of the west wall and stood there, looking out at the city below. Assessing. Mapping. Like he was already working. Rowan watched him. There was something about the way Dante stood that was familiar in a way Rowan couldn't immediately place. It wasn't military. Not exactly. But it was close to it. The deliberate stillness. The economy of movement. The sense that every part of his body was available at a moment's notice. Whoever this man was, he had not learned to stand like that behind a desk. Rowan moved to the couch and sat, pulling out his phone to have something to look at, something to do with his hands. From the corner of his eye, he tracked Dante's position in the room. 20 minutes passed. Caspin did not come back out. The penthouse stayed quiet. Dante moved through the space in a slow, methodical sweep, not intrusive, not obvious, but unmistakably purposeful. Checking sight lines. Checking door frames. Rowan watched the whole thing in his peripheral vision and said nothing. Then it hit him. Dante wasn't sweeping the room as it related to Caspian's position. He wasn't checking angles from the master bedroom, wasn't assessing the study door, wasn't orienting himself around the room's most powerful occupant. Every line of sight he checked. Every blind spot he catalogued. They all funneled back to one point. The couch where Rowan was sitting. Rowan stilled. His mind caught up a half-second later, and when it did, his chest went tight in a way that had nothing to do with threat assessment. Dante wasn't guarding Caspian. He was guarding Rowan. Before Rowan could decide what to do with that realization, Dante's phone lit up in his jacket pocket. He turned away, stepping toward the far corner of the room, his back to Rowan. His voice dropped low, almost too low, but the penthouse was quiet enough that fragments of sound carried. Not English. Something else. Something clipped and rhythmic, spoken with the familiarity of a first language, and the intensity of a man delivering a report. Rowan's eyes narrowed. His hand tightened around his phone. Dante ended the call. Turned back around. His expression had not changed. He crossed the room slowly, stopping a few feet from Rowan. Not close enough to crowd. Close enough to be heard when he dropped his voice. Rowan looked up at him. Dante's eyes were steady. Careful. Something passed behind them that Rowan could not name. "Don't trust the man you married," he said quietly. "He's already planning your exit." Rowan didn't breathe. Dante turned and walked toward the foyer without another word. He found his position near the main entrance and stood there. Back straight, hands loose, eyes forward. And Rowan sat with those 7 words doing something permanent inside his chest. The charity gala was held at the Hargrove Hotel, 40 stories above the city, in a ballroom made entirely of glass and gold light. Rowan stood at the edge of it, and felt like a man wearing someone else's skin. He had worn the suit Caspian's assistant had selected. He had arrived in Caspian's car. He had walked through the entrance beside Caspian, which was the closest they had been to each other in 3 days, and even then, Caspian had not looked at him. Not once. He had smiled for cameras and pressed flesh with donors and laughed at things other men said, and Rowan had moved alongside him like a shadow. Like furniture. Dante stood 12 feet back. Always 12 feet. Always positioned so that Rowan was in his direct sideline, no matter how the crowd shifted. Rowan told himself he wasn't counting on that. He told himself a lot of things. The problem walked in at 8:15. He was tall, expensively dressed, and he moved toward Caspian with the ease of someone who had made that walk before. Caspian's face opened in a way it almost never did, genuine, warm, unlocked, and when the man settled beside him and Caspian's hand moved to the small of his back, the gesture was so natural that it was clear either of them had remembered to hide it. The room noticed. The way rooms always notice things, with small shifts and lowered voices and polite eyes that look away just a beat too late. Rowan noticed most of all. He stood with a champagne glass in his hand that he would not drink from, because he needed every single one of his senses working, and he kept his face exactly still. Soldier's face. The one that cost him something every time he had to wear it. The man looked over at Rowan eventually. He said something to Caspian. Low, leaning in, and Caspian's mouth curved. Then the man smiled at Rowan directly. Wide. Polished. The kind of smile that was designed to land like a slap. You must be Caspian's arrangement, he said. He mentioned he had one. I wasn't sure you'd still be around, honestly. These things tend to have an expiration date. The polite noise of the ballroom filled the silence that followed. Somewhere, a string quartet played something Rowan didn't recognize. Caspian said nothing. Which was, Rowan understood in that moment, worse than anything he could have said. Two women nearby turned slightly away, the way people do when they want to seem like they weren't listening but need to position themselves to hear better. A man in a gray tuxedo lifted his champagne flute and smiled at no one. Rowan took a breath. He set his glass down on a passing tray. He excused himself to no one in particular. And he walked. He made it to the hallway before the composure cracked. Not loudly. Not the way it happens in movies. It was quiet and contained, the way everything always was with Rowan. He pressed his back to the wall in an alcove just past the restroom corridor, and he breathed through it. Jaw tight. Eyes fixed on the floor. He had been through worse. He knew he had been through worse. But there was something particular about being humiliated in a room full of people who were all too polished to acknowledge it. Something that got into the places the other things hadn't reached. Footsteps. Even unhurried. Rowan looked up. Dante stood at the mouth of the alcove, holding a glass of water. He held it out without speaking. Rowan stared at it for a moment. I don't need that. Dante didn't move. Didn't retract the offer. Soldiers bleed quietly, he said. Doesn't mean they aren't bleeding. Something broke open in Rowan's chest. Just a fracture, a small one. But it spread in the silence between them with more speed than he was ready for. His jaw went tight. His hand came up and pressed flat against his sternum, an old reflex, and he felt himself tremble once. Just once. Then he shut it down hard. He took the water. He didn't say anything. But he took it. Dante stood there while Rowan drank. Not watching him. Watching the hallway. Keeping his eyes out so Rowan could have the moment without an audience of even one. Rowan set the empty glass down on the narrow ledge behind him. Then Caspian appeared at the corridor entrance. He looked at Rowan with an expression Rowan had seen before, the kind a man wears when he's about to tell you that something is your fault. Controlled. Patient. The face of a man who has decided to be generous with his displeasure. He stepped into the alcove and his voice came low, barely above the murmur of the gala. You're making a scene. A pause. Rowan, I need you to stop embarrassing me. And just like that, Rowan understood something he had been avoiding for months. The other men. The coldness. The cruelty in front of witnesses. None of it was carelessness. It was intentional. Every single bit of it had been on purpose. Caspian held his gaze for a beat longer, then turned and walked back toward the ballroom. Like the conversation was over. Like Rowan had already agreed. Dante moved before Rowan could register why. His hand closed around Rowan's wrist, firm, quick, and he pulled Rowan back 2 steps into the alcove as a cluster of photographers rounded the corridor corner, lenses up, scanning faces. They passed without stopping. Dante released Rowan's wrist. The warmth of his grip stayed anyway. Rowan stared at the far wall. He replayed Caspian's voice in his head. Then, from back inside the ballroom, drifting through the doors as they swung open for a moment. Caspin's voice. Easy. Assured. Rowan caught only a fragment before the doors swung shut again. Once the paperwork is done, he'll be gone. The corridor went very still. Rowan's blood ran cold. Not from fear. From the sudden and terrible clarity that he had been running out of time for a while now. And hadn't known it. He asked Caspin directly. That same night. In the penthouse, with the city lights burning 42 floors below, and the silence of the apartment pressing in from every wall. Rowan stood in the center of the living room and said the words flat and clean, no preamble. What paperwork? Caspin looked up from his phone. He set it down on the arm of the chair with the kind of deliberateness that telegraphed nothing would surprise him tonight. I was wondering when you'd get to that. Rowan waited. He was very good at waiting. Caspin leaned back. He crossed one knee over the other and let the silence stretch, a power move, and they both knew it. I'm filing for annulment, Rowan. We don't need to make it a whole thing. Rowan's pulse did not change. He would not give Caspin the satisfaction of watching it change. On what grounds? Caspin's expression shifted, not much, just enough. A slight loosening at the corners of his mouth. The micro-movement of a man who is about to say something he has been waiting to say for a while. You're damaged goods, Rowan. That's not an insult. It's just accurate. The discharge, the injury, the debt, the instability, none of it was what I needed long-term. You understand that. Every word delivered with the careful, gentle tone of a man who believed he was being reasonable. Rowan felt something happen inside his chest that he did not have a name for. It wasn't heartbreak. He had felt heartbreak, he knew its shape. This was something older. Something that lived underneath all the training and all the discipline and all the careful management of emotion. This was the part of him that had survived everything. And it had just taken a direct hit. He turned around and walked to the bedroom. He did not run. He did not slam anything. He opened the closet and pulled out a bag and he began, slowly, systematically, to pack it. His hands shook. He let them. He was done performing stillness for rooms that didn't deserve it. He had the bag half filled when he registered the presence in the doorway. Dante. Standing in the frame, not crossing the threshold. His face unreadable. Step aside, Rowan said. He didn't look up. Rowan. Step aside. Dante didn't move. Rowan straightened up and looked at him, and his expression was the one he used in the field, the one that communicated that he was done negotiating and the next step would not be verbal. Dante looked back at him with something entirely different. If you walk out alone tonight, you won't make it to the street. Rowan's jaw tightened. Is that a threat? It's a warning. There's a difference. Rowan looked at him for a long beat. Then he looked past him, at the hallway, at the front of the penthouse. The security console near the elevator. The light on it was different. He had looked at that console every day for 14 months, and the indicator light had always been green. Tonight it was amber. That meant the floor access had been changed. Rowan moved toward the window. He pulled out his phone and tried to dial, his brother first. Then a colleague from his unit he still kept in contact with. Then anyone. The call screen opened and sat there. Loading. Loading. The signal bars flickered. Dropped. He tried again. Same result. He looked back at Dante. Dante's expression had not changed, but his eyes had, just slightly. There was something in them now. a tension that looked almost like urgency. He reached into the interior pocket of his jacket. He held out a phone, small, cheap, a burner, and placed it on the dresser between them. Rowan stared at it. He looked back at Dante. Studied his face the way he had learned to study terrain, looking for the thing that would tell him which direction was safe and which direction was the drop. Dante held his gaze. No performance. No calculation. Just a man who was very clearly asking Rowan to make a decision, and who understood what it would cost to trust him. "If you want to survive tonight," Dante said, "you have to trust me." The amber light on the security console pulsed once. Rowan looked at it. Looked at the phone. Looked at Dante. He picked up the burner. Rowan went anyway. Not because he trusted Dante. Not yet. But because he had spent his entire adult life making the hard call instead of the safe one, and standing still in a room with a jammed phone signal and a changed elevator code felt less like safety and more like a trap he was already inside. He told Dante he needed 10 minutes. He needed one. He slipped out the service corridor door while Dante was on a call in the far corner of the main room. He moved fast and quiet, the way they trained him, the way it lived in his muscle memory even now, and he found the service elevator at the end of the back passage and he hit the button. The doors opened. 3 men stood inside. They were not in Caspian's standard security uniform. They wore the uniforms, but the details were wrong badge placement, wrong earpiece model, the way they stood just slightly off from how trained house security stands. Rowan's brain processed all of it in the same half-second his body was already moving backward. One of them stepped out. He was broad. He moved fast. His hand closed around Rowan's arm. "Easy," the man said. "Property doesn't run." Something in Rowan's mind went very white and very quiet. Property. His elbow came up. Sharp. The strike caught the man's forearm and broke his grip, and Rowan pivoted and drove his knee up before the man could recover. The second man came out of the elevator fast, and Rowan dropped back against the corridor wall, hands up, weight shifted, reading angles. There were 3 of them. He had 1 hallway. He was good. He was very good. But 3 on 1 in a corridor with no exit was the kind of math that only worked out one way. Then Dante came through the service door. He moved like nothing Rowan had ever seen outside of a combat zone. No warning. No announcement. He was simply not in the doorway, and then he was, and the closest man went down before Rowan had fully tracked the motion. A precise, controlled strike. Mechanical efficiency. The third man swung and Dante caught his wrist and turned the movement back on him with something that looked almost boring in how clean it was. It was over in 11 seconds. Rowan stared at the 2 men on the floor. The third had made it back into the elevator. The doors had closed on him, the car descending. He looked at Dante. Dante was already moving, grabbing Rowan's arm, not the same as the other man's grip, not restraining, guiding, and pulling him toward the stairwell door at the end of the corridor. They hit the stairs and moved. Down. Fast. No talking. Rowan's pulse was running high. Not from fear, from the kind of adrenaline clarity he hadn't felt since the field. His mind was sharp and cataloging and working through everything at speed. Those men weren't Caspian's regular team. Or they were Caspian's, but operating under different orders. Either Caspian had another layer of personnel, people Rowan had never seen, or someone else had access to this building's systems. They stopped on a landing between floors. Dante held a hand up and Rowan stilled. Both of them listening. Nothing from above. Nothing from below. Just the sound of both of them breathing, and the low hum of the building around them. Dante's body heat was right there. Close. The stairwell was narrow and they were both pressed against the same wall, and Rowan was acutely, unreasonably aware of how close they were standing. Dante pulled out the burner phone. He dialed. One ring. The call connected. Phase 1 is compromised, Dante said. Low. Clipped. Fast. A voice responded. Rowan caught the words from where he stood. They were close enough. The signal was clear. The voice was low. Controlled. Precise. It was exactly Dante's voice. The same cadence. The same register. The same weight behind the consonants. Not similar. Not close. Identical. Rowan's head turned sharply. He stared at the side of Dante's face. Dante's jaw was set, his eyes on the middle distance, still listening to the voice, his own voice, coming through the phone. Rowan's mouth opened. He couldn't get the words out immediately. Tried again. That? He swallowed. That sounded like you. Dante ended the call. His thumb moved off the screen slowly. He didn't look at Rowan immediately. He looked at the phone in his hand. Something moved across his face that Rowan couldn't read, something that wasn't discomfort, exactly, but wasn't indifference either. Then he turned and met Rowan's eyes. A long beat. Because it is me, Dante said, quiet and even. Or one of me. The stairwell hummed. The lights above them flickered once. Rowan stared at him. And somewhere beneath them, from the direction of the lobby, came the sound of boots on concrete. Moving fast. Moving up. Coming for them. They moved through the dark in Dante's car. No headlights until they cleared the city grid. No words until Rowan stopped shaking enough to form them. The safe house was 40 minutes outside the city. An industrial building dressed up as nothing. Unmarked door. Reinforced frame. The kind of place that didn't exist on any map Rowan had ever seen, and he had seen a lot of maps. Dante pulled the car around back and killed the engine. Stay close, he said. Rowan almost laughed. Where exactly did Dante think he was going to go? They went in through a side entrance. Long corridor. Low light. The smell of concrete and something metallic underneath it. Rowan's military instincts were cataloging everything, exits, angles, the sound his own footsteps made against the floor. He counted 3 cameras before they reached the main room. Dante pushed open a heavy door. And Rowan stopped walking. 2 men stood inside. They were wearing the same kind of dark, nondescript clothing as Dante. Same build. Same posture, that specific economy of stillness that Rowan had clocked the first night in the penthouse and couldn't place. He could place it now. Because the men standing in that room had the same face as the man beside him. Not similar. Not family resemblance. The same face. Rowan's brain refused it for a full 3 seconds. His eyes moved from one man to the next and back again, running the comparison over and over like the answer was going to change. It didn't change. One of them was colder than Dante. It came off him in a way that wasn't performance. It was just what lived there behind the eyes, in the set of the jaw. Still. Removed. The kind of cold that gets made, not born. The other was quieter. He stood slightly apart from both of them, watching Rowan with the careful attention of someone running calculations. Nobody moved for a moment. Then the cold one spoke. He's smaller than the file said. He's right here, Rowan said. The cold one's eyes shifted to him. A pause. Something that might have been the beginning of respect, or might have been nothing at all. Dante stepped forward. Rowan, He said the name like it was something he was placing carefully on a table. These are my brothers. Zion. He indicated the cold one. And Malachi. The quiet one. Triplets. The word landed in Rowan's head like a stone dropped into still water. Triplet Alpha Syndicate. All three of them. Standing in a room that smelled like classified operations, staring at him with faces that were the same face, and Rowan was the one person in this building who had not known any of this was coming. He turned to Dante. You were inside Caspin's household. His voice was level. He made it level. This whole time. Dante didn't flinch. Yes. You were using his access. His security systems. His trust. Yes. And you were using me. Not a question. Not yet. Dante opened his mouth, and Malachi cut across him before he could speak. Quiet, precise. Your husband didn't hire Dante through his own channels. He hired through a shell company we own. He thought he was getting a contractor. He got an infiltration. Rowan absorbed that. He looked at Zion. Zion looked back at him, unmoved. Caspin has been running illegal defense contracts through his legitimate business infrastructure for 3 years, Zion said. Transport routes, clearance documentation, access to restricted zones. He needed a soldier with existing military knowledge to plug the last gap in his network. Pause on that. Rowan felt the floor shift under him. Not literally. Just the way everything does when a sentence reorders your entire understanding of your own life. He didn't marry me, Rowan said slowly. No, Zion said. He acquired me. Nobody corrected him. The silence in that room was the loudest thing Rowan had heard in years. Dante was watching him. Not with the cold assessment Zion used. With something that had no good name, something that sat between guilt and grief, and something else Rowan wasn't ready to look at directly. I didn't expect you to be real, Dante said quietly. I thought you were just a name in a file. Rowan looked at him for a long moment. Then Malachi said it. Flat and without ceremony. Your husband didn't just cheat on you. A beat. He bought you. The room held that sentence like a held breath. And before Rowan could respond, before he could even decide what his body was going to do with that information, Malachi looked up from his phone with the expression of a man who has just received confirmation of something he was hoping wouldn't be confirmed. We have a problem, he said. Zion turned. Malachi held up the phone screen. A name on it. A location. And a timestamp from 11 minutes ago. Zion's face didn't change. But his voice did. Just slightly. They already called it in, he said. Your name is in a federal missing persons flag, Rowan. You've been reported absent from the penthouse. Dante's head came up sharply. Then the burner in his jacket pocket went off. He answered. One word from the other end. His expression went very still. He looked at Rowan. Federal agents have a warrant. They're moving on the penthouse now. A pause. But they're saying you're not there. Rowan stared at him. Caspin told them I was missing. Yes. Which means he already filed the paperwork. Rowan's jaw tightened. And he moved up the timeline. Dante said nothing. Because there was nothing to say that made it better. He's already planned your exit, Zion said. He was looking at his own phone now, scrolling. And he filed the missing report to get ahead of whatever you might try to say. Rowan's breath came in. Out. Controlled. He looked at Dante. So what's the play? Dante met his eyes. We finish what we came to finish. Rowan sat on the edge of a cot in the back room of the safe house, and he let himself look at the laptop screen for the third time. The third time wasn't easier. The photographs were time-stamped. Surveillance quality. Grainy, shot from distance, but clear enough. Rowan, outside a coffee shop near his old base. 3 weeks before Caspin ever approached him. Then Rowan, at his discharge processing office. Then Rowan, at the hospital where he'd had his second surgery. Then Rowan, at the apartment where he'd been staying after the discharge, a place he told exactly 2 people about. Caspin's people had been watching him for months before they ever made contact. The discharge wasn't just bad luck. The financial situation wasn't just a rough patch. The timing of Caspin's arrival in his life, that perfectly calibrated moment of maximum vulnerability, had not been an accident. None of it had been an accident. Rowan closed the laptop. He stood up. He walked to the far wall, and he placed both hands flat against it, and he breathed. Malachi appeared in the doorway. "I don't need anything," Rowan said. "I know," Malachi said. He leaned against the door frame and did not come in. "I'm not offering anything." Rowan pressed his forehead against the wall. "How long did you know?" His voice came out rough. He didn't try to smooth it. "We identified Caspin's operation 14 months ago," Malachi said. "We've been building the case since before your marriage. We knew he had acquired someone. We didn't know who you were as a person until Dante was already inside." Rowan's hands curled against the wall. "He engineered my whole life." He said it quietly. Not to Malachi. To the wall. To whatever part of himself was still processing. He manufactured the conditions. And then he walked in and called it rescue. Yes. That's the part one can't. He stopped. Started again. I made a decision. I chose to stay. I thought it was my choice. Malachi was quiet for a moment. It wasn't. Rowan turned around. And the thing he had been holding together cracked straight through. Not loudly. It never was with him. It was just the way his breath broke on the exhale. The way his hand came up and pressed over his eyes. The way his back hit the wall and he slid down it until he was sitting on the floor, and he stayed there, and he stopped trying to hold any of it together. Malachi didn't move from the doorway. He didn't try to fix it. Didn't offer words. He just stood there, and he let Rowan fall apart in a room where no one was watching who wasn't safe. That mattered. Rowan didn't have the language for how much that mattered. Dante appeared behind Malachi a minute later. He took in the scene. He looked at Malachi, who gave him the smallest nod, something passing between them that required no words. Malachi left. Dante came in. He sat on the floor across from Rowan. Not close. Not hovering. Just present. Rowan's head came up. His eyes were red and he did not look away. All alphas, Rowan said. The words came out like something he'd been holding at a distance for a long time. Every single one. You think you're saving something. You think you're offering something real. And it's always just a transaction. Dante took that. He took all of it. He did not defend himself. He did not correct the grouping. He sat with it the way you sit with something that is true and also not the whole truth, and he waited. The defense routes, Rowan said finally. The military access. He married me to get inside secured transport networks. Yes. He was going to use my knowledge. Then discard me. Yes. And the annulment was the exit. Clean. Fast. Before I could figure out what he'd taken from me. Dante said nothing. Because yes was the only answer, and he'd already said it twice. Rowan looked at the floor. His jaw moved once. Then he looked back at Dante. Tell me there's evidence. There's evidence. Tell me it's enough. Dante met his eyes. It's enough. Rowan exhaled. Slow. From somewhere deep. Then the laptop on the cot behind him lit up. Malachi's voice came through the open door, sharp, no preamble. Zion! Get in here! Rowan stood. Dante stood. They moved back into the main room together. Malachi was staring at two screens. His expression was the careful, controlled blank that Rowan was learning to read as the equivalent of an alarm going off. On the left screen, a surveillance feed. A building on the city's east side. A car parked in front that Rowan recognized. His younger brother Darius's apartment building. On the right screen, a text message forwarded from an unknown number to the burner network. It read, "He comes back by midnight, or the kid takes the ride." Rowan read it once. He read it again. And every single thing inside him that had just come apart went cold, and quiet, and hard. He looked at Dante. We're going back into the city. It wasn't a request. Rowan was out of the safe house before Dante finished issuing instructions to his brothers. The night air hit him, cold, sharp, the kind that cuts, and he moved toward the car with the focused stillness of a man who had taken everything personal out of the equation and replaced it with something that worked better in a crisis. Objective: get to Darius. Everything else was noise. Dante caught up to him at the car. He didn't try to slow Rowan down. He got in the driver's side and started the engine and pulled out before Rowan had finished closing his door, which told Rowan something important about how Dante operated under pressure. Good. They were the same that way. Malachi and Zion took a second vehicle. Different route. They communicated through the burner network in short, clipped exchanges that Rowan stopped trying to follow after the third message because his focus was locked on the road ahead and the math of how long it would take to get to Darius's building. 31 minutes at this speed. Too long. Dante pushed it to 26. The city came back up around them as they crossed into the grid, lights and motion and noise. And Rowan watched the streets with the same eyes he'd used in two different war zones. Reading movement. Reading stillness. Looking for the thing that was wrong. He found it 8 blocks from Darius's building. A flood barrier had gone up at the East River crossing. Emergency vehicles clustered on the far side. Blue and red lights strobing against the low clouds. The radio that Dante had running on low frequency cut into a broadcast. Something about the retention basin on the south side, a breach, water moving faster than the engineers had calculated. The city's east industrial zone was flooding. Dante looked at the barrier. Looked at the emergency vehicles. Looked at Rowan. Darius's building is on the dry side, Rowan said. He had already run the geography. But the industrial zone is between us and it. Alternate route adds 14 minutes. We don't have 14 minutes. Dante did not argue. He swung the car left, off the main road, onto a surface street that ran parallel to the flood zone perimeter. Rowan watched out the window as the water came into view, dark and fast, moving between buildings that should not have had water in them, reaching places it had not been given permission to reach. People were out. Some evacuating. Some standing on higher ground watching. Emergency responders moving in lines, coordinated chaos. The particular noise of a city dealing with something it was not fully prepared for. And then movement. A cluster of men in emergency worker vests, moving a large covered transport through the industrial access road, using the flood confusion as cover. Rowan tracked them. His brain ran the calculation automatically. Wrong direction for evacuation. Wrong cargo for rescue. Wrong pace for men who were supposed to be responding to a crisis. Dante. I see them. Caspian's cargo. Rowan's hand went to the door handle. Rowan. My brother is in a building 11 blocks from here and Caspian's men are moving product through a flood zone. Rowan's voice was completely level. I can do both. That is not. Rowan was already out of the car. He moved toward the edge of the flood zone, where the water was thigh-deep and the current ran faster than it looked. 2 civilians, an older man and a boy maybe 12, were stuck on a raised platform between 2 flooded vehicle bays, the water having cut off their exit path on both sides. Rowan didn't stop to calculate whether this was his problem. He went in. The cold hit him like a wall. The current pushed sideways, wanting to move him, and he planted his feet and pushed back the way he'd been taught in water rescue training, the course he'd taken in his 2nd year of service that he'd mostly forgotten until his body remembered it now. He reached the platform. Got the older man first, arm over his shoulder, weight distributed, moving back through the current in a line rather than against it. He got them both to higher ground. He was soaked from the waist down, and already moving back toward the industrial road where Caspian's men were when he heard the shot. 1 shot. Then nothing. He turned. Dante was down. Not all the way down. He was against the wall of a building at the edge of the access road, one hand pressed to his side, his face tight with the particular expression of a man managing pain on a clock. One of Caspian's men was sprinting away into the flood zone. Zion materialized from a side street and went after him without breaking pace. Rowan crossed the distance to Dante in 9 seconds. He dropped to a knee. His hands moved to Dante's side. Assessing, the way he'd assessed a dozen men in the field, reading injury by feel and response. How bad? Rowan said. Through and through. Missed the important parts. Dante's voice was strained but even. I've had worse. That's not an answer. It's the answer I have right now. Rowan looked up at his face. Dante was watching him back with an expression that had stopped being controlled about 30 seconds ago, something raw in it, something that had broken through the surface. And Rowan realized, with a clarity that hit him like cold water, that he was scared. Not of the flood. Not of Caspian. Not of any of this. He was scared of losing this man. Specifically this man. A man he had known for 6 days. That should not have been possible. It was anyway. Malachi appeared with a field kit from somewhere. Rowan didn't ask where. He moved aside to let Malachi work and stood up and turned toward the industrial access road. And stopped. Caspian was standing 15 feet away. He was wearing an emergency vest over his suit. He had a gun. He was smiling the way he smiled when he believed he had already won, which was the only way Rowan had ever seen him smile. You always come back when I whistle, Caspian said. He said it lightly. Like it was a fact he found mildly entertaining. Like Rowan standing in a flooded industrial zone, soaked and exhausted with one hand still red from Dante's blood, was just further confirmation of a pattern Caspian had never doubted. Rowan looked at him. And felt absolutely nothing except the specific, clarifying focus of a man who has run out of fear and arrived somewhere much quieter on the other side of it. Rowan did not move. Neither did Caspian. The flood water ran between them, maybe 2 inches deep here at the edge of the access road, moving slowly around their feet. The emergency lights from 3 blocks over pulsed in long, irregular sweeps. The sound of sirens came and went on the wind. Caspian kept the gun level. His stance was the stance of a man who had held a gun before but never needed to use it, confident in the threat, less certain about the follow-through. Rowan had spent 5 years reading men like that. "You want to do something with that," Rowan said. "Or are we just standing here?" Caspin's smile sharpened. "I want you to understand something first." He took one step forward. "Everything you think you built, your service, your reputation, the story you told yourself about who you are. I purchased it. I purchased your access, your records, your connections. You were an asset, Rowan. A very specific, very useful asset. And then you became a liability." Rowan was quiet. "That doesn't make you angry?" Caspin tilted his head. "Most people, when they find out what they actually are to someone." "You cheated," Rowan said. "Not because you wanted someone else. You did it to make me feel like nothing. To keep me from looking too closely at what you were actually doing." Something moved in Caspian's face. Just a flicker. "The humiliation was the management strategy," Rowan continued. "You needed me destabilized. Too focused on surviving the marriage to notice the business running underneath it." Caspian said nothing. "How long?" Rowan's voice stayed even. "How long were you planning to use my military clearance documentation before you filed the annulment? Does it matter?" "It matters to me." Caspian looked at him for a long moment. And then. And this was the thing Rowan would remember, the specific shape of this moment. Caspian lowered the gun an inch. Not because he'd decided to stop threatening. Because he'd gotten tired of performing. "4 more months," Caspian said. "Maybe 5. You were almost done being useful. Almost done being useful." Rowan heard it. He let himself hear all of it. And then he exhaled. Not from defeat. From something on the opposite end of defeat. The specific release of a man who has been carrying a weight that was never actually his to carry, and has just set it down. "Caspian." His voice was quiet and direct and had nothing left in it that was afraid. "It's over." Caspian raised the gun again. Then Zion came out of the dark on the left. Malachi came out on the right. They moved the way they always moved. Without announcement, without wasted motion, 2 men who had learned to work in tandem so long ago that the coordination was automatic. Zion had a gun leveled at Caspian before Caspian finished turning. Caspian swung his weapon toward Zion. Then back toward Rowan. Then toward Malachi. 3 targets. 1 gun. The math did not work in his favor, and he understood it. His jaw tightened. His composure, that polished and carefully maintained surface, began to come apart at the edges. "You don't understand what you're walking into," Caspian said. The lightness was gone. What replaced it was something uglier. "I have relationships with people in this city you will never touch. Politicians. Judges. People whose careers I have built from the ground up. You think your evidence matters against that infrastructure? You think a federal warrant survives 1 phone call from the right office?" Zion looked at him without expression. "We already made the calls for you," Zion said. Caspian frowned. Dante's voice came from behind Rowan. He was on his feet, slower than usual, one hand still at his side, but on his feet. He held up his phone. The screen showed a news feed, 3 different outlets, updating in real time. Evidence of illegal defense contracting, fraud, trafficking connections, bribery. All of it. Named sources. Documented. Timestamped. Already distributed. Caspian stared at the screen. He stared at it for a long time. His face did something Rowan had never seen it do. It went through several expressions in quick succession, calculation, then fury, then something that looked, briefly, like fear, before it landed on rage. Blind, unpolished, unmanaged rage. You think this is over? Caspin's voice cracked at the edge. Gone was the bourbon-smooth control. Gone was the careful patience. You think you can do this to me and walk away? Yes, Rowan said simply. Caspin lunged. Not toward Rowan. Toward Dante. The injured man, the easier target. Rowan moved first. He intercepted Caspin cleanly. 2 moves, a redirect and a takedown, and Caspin hit the wet concrete hard, face down, Rowan's knee in his back. Caspin's gun slid 3 feet across the access road and stopped against a drainage grate. Rowan stayed where he was. He could feel Caspin trying to push up beneath him. The struggle was genuine, but it was also already over. Zion picked up the gun. Dante looked at Caspin. At this man who had run a network of manipulation and money and harm from behind a glass penthouse, and his voice, when it came, was quiet. He deserves prison, Dante said. Not mercy. Not martyrdom. Sirens. Real ones. Close. Getting closer. Rowan stood up. He stepped back from Caspin, who was pushing himself up from the ground, soaked and shaking, the rage on his face replaced now by something more honest. The sound of authority arriving. Of consequences with a uniform and a timeline. Caspin looked at Rowan. You think this ends here? His voice had dropped to something almost private. Almost just between them. Federal agents appeared at both ends of the access road simultaneously. Lights. Calls to identify. The fast, certain movement of people executing a warrant they'd been waiting to execute. Caspin was surrounded in under 20 seconds. He was still looking at Rowan as they reached him. Still, even now, performing. The syndicate you stole from is coming, he said loud enough for anyone to hear. They'll slaughter you all. They put the cuffs on him. He kept talking as they moved him. His voice got smaller as the distance grew. And then it was just the water, and the lights, and the 4 of them standing in a flooded access road at the edge of a city that was already moving on to the next emergency. Rowan stood there. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt the specific weight of a thing that was finished. Not clean, not simple, but finished, and underneath that weight, a silence he hadn't heard in a long time. Dante appeared at his shoulder. Rowan didn't look at him. He said the syndicate is coming, Rowan said. Dante was quiet for a moment. Yes. Is he right? A beat. Yes. Rowan nodded once. He looked at the place where Caspin had been standing. Then we handle that too, he said. 3 days later, Rowan woke up in a private room that smelled like antiseptic and the particular stillness of a building that runs on careful schedules. He lay there for a moment and took inventory the way he always had, body first, then surroundings, then situation. His left side was bandaged. His throat was dry. The light coming through the window was the flat white of late morning. He was alive. That was the first thing. Dante was in the chair beside the bed. Not asleep. Just still, the way Dante was still, deliberate, present, watching Rowan with the expression of a man who has been waiting for something and is now trying not to show how much the waiting cost him. He looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. He probably hadn't. Rowan looked at him for a moment without speaking. Then he said very simply, "How's your side?" Something shifted in Dante's face. "Through and through," he said. Same answer as before. "Healing. You should be in a bed. You should be unconscious." "I'm not." "No," Dante said. You're not. A pause settled between them, not uncomfortable. The kind of pause that has weight and space and doesn't need to be filled. Rowan looked at the ceiling. Zion and Malachi, he said. Zion is handling the federal cooperation agreement. Malachi is. Dante paused. Malachi took the worst of it in the flood zone. He'll recover. It'll take time. Rowan closed his eyes for a moment. I didn't ask any of you to. We know, Dante said. That's not how it works with us. Nobody asked anyone. It was just what happened. Rowan opened his eyes. He turned his head and looked at Dante directly. The way he hadn't fully let himself look at him since the flood zone, since the moment he'd registered exactly what it felt like to think this man might not get back up. You infiltrated my husband's household, Rowan said. You watched me. You built a mission around a situation I was living inside. Yes. And somewhere in the middle of that. Yes. Dante said it before Rowan finished. He said it the way you say something you've been carrying around and have finally decided to put down. Somewhere in the middle of it, I stopped being able to separate the mission from you. I didn't plan that. I wouldn't have chosen it. It complicated everything. It complicated everything, Rowan repeated. Yes. Rowan was quiet. I don't know what love looks like anymore, he said. The honesty of it surprised him even as it came out. It wasn't a performance of vulnerability. It was just true. I thought I knew. I made a decision based on what I thought I knew, and that decision was engineered from the outside by someone who saw me as a resource. So I genuinely don't know what the real version looks like. Dante leaned forward in the chair, his elbows on his knees, his eyes on Rowan. Then we learn it from scratch, he said. It was that simple. It was the most complicated thing Rowan had ever heard. He looked at this man, this specific, complicated, dangerous, careful man, and he thought about the hallway in the penthouse where the laughter had stopped him cold. He thought about 14 months of performing contentment in a marriage that had been a contract on the other side. He thought about the soldier's face and the 4 seconds of falling apart, and all the times he had kept himself together for rooms that didn't deserve it. Love isn't possession. That was what he understood now. He'd spent a year inside something that looked like love from a distance, and was possession up close. The real version, if it existed, if it was possible after all of this, had to feel different in the bones. Choice. Not obligation. Not transaction. Not something engineered and calibrated and timed. Choice. Rowan looked at Dante's hand, resting on the edge of the bed. He reached over and covered it with his own. Not as someone who needed saving. Not as an acquisition, or a resource, or an arrangement. As a man choosing. On his own terms. For the first time in a long time. Dante turned his hand over under Rowan's and held on. Neither of them said anything else for a while. The morning light shifted through the window and the building kept its careful schedule around them, and outside, somewhere in the city, the water from the flood was still receding. Things were still uncertain. The syndicate Caspin had screamed about from the back of a federal vehicle was real. Dante had confirmed that, and Dante did not confirm things he wasn't sure of. Zion was already building the intelligence picture. Malachi, from his own hospital bed, was already running analysis. The next thing was coming. But right now, in this room, it was just Rowan and a man who had stopped pretending somewhere in the middle of a mission and never quite started again. A nurse came to check readings. Left without disturbing much. And then, on the small table beside the bed, where someone had placed Rowan's personal effects, his phone, his watch, a folded piece of clothing. There was an envelope. Plain white. No return address. Rowan stared at it. He didn't remember it being there before. He reached for it. Opened it. Inside, a single card. Thick paper. And on it, printed in clean, deliberate type, a symbol he didn't recognize, an insignia, angular and precise, the kind of mark that belonged to an organization that didn't advertise. Below the symbol for words. We know where you are. Rowan held the card. Dante had gone still beside him. He'd seen it. His face had done the thing it did when he was running calculations in real time. Rowan looked at the card for another moment. Then he set it face down on the table. When do we start? He said. Dante looked at him. We already have, he said. And that, all of it, everything that had been taken and survived and chosen and built back from nothing, was exactly where the real story began. If this story hit you, you already know someone else needs to hear it. Share it. And if you are not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications. Because stories like Rowan's, stories about survival and dignity, and what it really means to choose yourself, drop on this channel regularly, and you do not want to miss a single one. Drop in the comments, what was the moment that changed everything for you in this story? When he reached for Dante's hand not as someone who needed saving, but as someone making a choice? Tell us below. Your thoughts inspire more people than you know.